book is about a GTMO prisoner who was detained on the charges of terrorism but was never convicted of a crime. He spent almost 16 years behind bars, and it took about 6 years for his lawyers, Nancy Hollander and Sylvia Royce, to go through negotiations, litigations, to finally clear the manuscript for public release. So I read this book in more or less collected composure. I told myself, don't cry. You want to be objective. Personal favorite was just read it. You can cry later. But to no avail. Frankly, no pep talk can prepare you. This book is about a human being being tortured by other human beings in an institute designed for human beings. And depriving myself of any emotion would be an inhumane thing to do. It's a hard topic. Okay, so I just got super comfortable, took off my shoes, and let's talk about Guantanamo Bay. What do the American people think? I'm eager to know. I would like to believe that the majority of Americans want to see justice done, and they're not interested in financing the detention of innocent people. Welcome to Refugee from Russia podcast. I hope you're doing well. Today we're doing something different. After the interview with Hasanat, I really went on a little bit of a journey because I wanted to learn more about people in prisons, specifically Muslim people in prisons. He asked me a question about Guantanamo Bay. Have you heard about Guantanamo Bay? I didn't have much to say. Merely knowing the phrase doesn't give you the knowledge or expertise to speak about it. Now, I don't claim to have the expertise, even after doing research. That said, there is a couple of things I want to share with you after I read the book, Guantanamo Diaries. In today's video, I would like to share some of my core observations and themes that I discovered throughout the book. Now, this is not a comprehensive book overview, and an awful amount of work went into building this book and releasing it, and there's just not enough time to cover everything. But hey, more reasons to actually buy the book and support the author. So let's dive in. My first observation is that most of the prisoner guards were people from poor American families. Madu met with a large number of guards that came from all ages, all races, all religions. But what struck him the most was who was picked to do the dirtiest job there was in GTMO. More often than not, it was people from less fortunate backgrounds. He says in the book, many people in the army come from poorer families. He also recalls a conversation he had with a guard who stopped him from praying, in which he wondered, why would you do that? He said, I could have refused, but my boss would have given me a shitty job or transferred me to a bad place. I know I can go to hell for what I've done to you. One of the interrogators, Mr. X, as Slahi refers to him in the book, was a celebrity among the torture squad. According to Slahi, Mr. X knew full well what he was doing, that he was committing crimes, and he was ordered to cover himself. Mr. Slahi, in his book, says, how could a man as smart as he possibly accept such a degrading job, which surely is going to haunt him for the rest of his life, he wondered. Then he says, maybe he had few choices, because maybe people in the army come from poor families. I truly admire Muhammadu. To have understanding and empathy towards someone who tortured him is not something that an average person would do. No, I wouldn't. So truly, it's a testament to his character. No wonder that some of the guards or even officers or interrogators, they couldn't hold back their tears when they would either leave their job and knew they're not going to see Muhammadu anymore, or when he was transferred to another facility. They really got to know him well, and some of them even became friends. There's a person that he refers to as Big G. He wrote to him, I've done my damnedest to maintain a detainee-guard relationship. At times, I have failed. It is almost impossible not to like a character like yourself. Keep your faith. I'm sure it will guide you in the right direction. Observation number 2. Interrogators know very little about Arabs and Muslims. So this is something I would always think. If you are working at a prison where you have a lot of Muslim detainees, you would most likely have introduction into Islam or Arab culture. And I would even suggest beyond an introduction, you would have good understanding and knowledge to help you do your job. Interrogators require to get into people's psyche. And in order to do that, if you are dealt with, say, population from a specific background, you would want to know more about them, right? And let's take it beyond that. An ordinary civilian with an ordinary job has to have qualifications to do his responsibilities, whether that's working at a KFC or working at a bank or even working at any job, really. I know for a fact in my day-to-day, In my job, if I'm not performing to the level that I'm expected, if I don't have the basic understanding of, say, tech, I will be shown the door really quickly. But it seems like there are different standards for the interrogation guards and military personnel at Guantanamo Bay. Most guards did not know the difference between Muslims from Middle East and North Africa. Heck, they don't even know the difference between languages from 2 different continents. Once a female sergeant brought Slahi a CD and said, "Look, I got you some Arabic music." But it wasn't even close. It was Bosnian music on that CD. The sergeant genuinely asked, "It is not the same?" Bosnian Arabic. She thinks it's the same. And on top of that, this sergeant was not a regular sergeant. As Slahi says in the book, the sergeant is a member of GTF and not just anybody. She is supposedly armed with basic knowledge about Arabs and Muslims. But she and other interrogators would always address Slahi as, "You guys from the Middle East, and someone who is from Mauritania." There's another example that he brings up in his book that I found really funny. Back before his arrest, when he was in Mauritania, he used to make phone calls for work to the US. He was working in a telecommunications company. It was part of his responsibilities. And one of the calls, he was introducing himself, and the lady asked, "Where are you from?" He said, "I'm from Mauritania." And she said, "Which state?" Observation number 3. In GTMO, prisoners are guilty until proven innocent. So in regular judicial system, you are innocent until proven guilty. It's not the case in GTMO. In GTMO, everyone is considered guilty until they're proven innocent, and it can be held for years and years without a sentencing. There's a woman that Slahi refers to as SSJ Mary. Once he had a conversation with her, a woman that he refers to as someone positive and not as the other guards. So he says, "You should find the terrorist first. You can't just go wild and hurt everybody in the name of terrorism." She replied that every Arab is a terrorist until proven innocent. My observation number 4, which I found really interesting. The most cruelest sergeants, guards, and interrogators were the ones in the late 30s, 40s with unhappy marriages. Throughout the book, one theme kept coming up. The more unhappy the interrogator is or was, the crueler his interrogation techniques and subsequently torture was. An interrogator who proudly referred to himself as Master Yoda said once to Slahi, "My wife calls me an asshole." He was in his early 40s with an unhappy marriage and with kids. Slahi in secret called him Interrogator Junior because he saw him as a little above the level of a guard and a little under the level of an interrogator. He developed his own rules with Slahi, including punishments and reward system. He mostly listened to rock and roll, some country music. Get a load of this. His favorite songs were "Die Terrorists Die," the Taliban song, and "Let the Bodies Hit the Floor." No wonder his wife doesn't have anything good to say about him. Side note, men who are bitter and unhappy should not be allowed in positions where they are interrogators, in my opinion. There was also another guard who, unlike other guards, refused to take the name of a Star Wars. It was a running joke around that facility. Everybody would take a name or a nickname that would correspond to a character in Star Wars. So this guard was a skinny white guy in his late 30s, and he refused to take a nickname. At first, he was doing his job pretty well. He dutifully brought him food, but very quickly he realized that he can yell at him and force him to do harsh PTs. He says in his book, he couldn't believe he's entitled to so much power. He almost went wild, making me stand up for hours during the night, even though he knew I suffer from sciatic nerve. Girl, if you know what sciatic nerve is, if you experienced it, you can't be standing for minutes sometimes. On top of that, this guard used to say, and I quote, "I wish you would make a mistake, any mistake, so I can strike," while performing some corny martial arts moves. Another observation that I noticed is that most of the GTMO prisoners are highly educated and on average speak 3 languages. Muhammad spoke 4 languages, and anytime he would mention that he knows many languages, it would be met with laughter and disbelief. One time an officer, William, asked him what language does he speak, and one of them was German. He said, "Wait, we're gonna test you." So he brought another officer into the room who spoke German. And the officer says, and I quote, "His German is better than mine." And after that, William became even more suspicious of Muhammadu How does he know so many languages, he thought. And he continued to interrogate him even more. Now, this is where I get increasingly frustrated. In one breath, nearly every interrogator that Muhammadu came across was showing his disdain for the inferior Arabs or Muslims, yet they all get impressed by their education. So, let me get that straight. So, Arabs and Muslims are dumb terrorists, but they also are highly educated, skilled, speak more than 3 languages, and their interrogators get surprised by that. So, which one is it? If you say, oh, it can be both, then you just described an average American white-collar criminal. Congratulations, you just reached the moral consistency. Goodbye, cognitive dissonance. So my next observation, ICRC had little to no use to the detainees. ICRC is an international community of Red Cross that has a mandate under Geneva Convention to visit prisoners of war, civilians during difficult conflicts, and other detained in situations of violence around the world. That's their job, to go to prisons and interview prisoners. They visit jails, they take notes of the violations, they speak to the prisoners, and then they make reports that then should correct the wrongs. Prison in Jordan, where Muhammad was taken after Mauritania, had a rule about ICRC, which stated the ICRC visits the prison every 14 days. Do not talk to ICRC about your political case. Muhammad was initially very happy about ICRC visits. I mean, I would be too. Anybody would be. Because even if you are considered criminal until proven innocent, you still want someone, a third party, to witness what's going on, to take the notes, to do the interviews, to write the reports, so the people out there outside of GTMO know what's going on, right? He was also happy about the visits because it would mean that he finally can send letters to his family. Unfortunately, he never got to see ICRC. The entire 8 months that they spent in Jordan, he was hidden from ICRC. Every time they would come in, he would be moved from facility to facility so that he doesn't get to see them. Moreover, when he was transferred to Cuba, he learned a lot from other detainees about ICRC, and now he knows better not to talk to them. He said, I always hid the ill treatment when the ICRC came and asked me, because I was afraid of retaliation. That and the fact that the ICRC has no real pressure on the US government. He adds, many detainees refused to talk to the ICRC and suspected them to be the interrogators disguised by the ICRC interviewers. Wow. I think the intention behind the work that ICRC was doing, and particularly Beatrice, who Slahi mentions in the book, is truly commendable. They want to help the people that are prisoners. They want them to tell what's going on. But what's really crucial, and I think Slahi articulated it brilliantly in the book, if there aren't any real consequences towards the country, army, military force that is committing war crimes, there is little to no help in documenting the crimes. And we frankly have seen this over and over again with what's going on in Gaza. ICJ is reporting, UN organizations have been reporting the crimes on the ground. They have been highlighting the staggering amount of people that are starving. Unfortunately, when there is no actual force behind enforcing or even stopping the war crimes, there is frankly little to no help in documenting. That's my personal opinion. Feel free to disagree with me. Okay, so ready for another one? This is spicy. Female US surgeons and military personnel and female military personnel are highly likely to be sexual predators. There's a couple of reports that are actually highlighting this very observation that I'm sharing with you today, such as the Schmidt-Furlow report, the GOIG-IG report, the Senate Armed Services Committee report, and several other sources. They all have documented the sexual violence and humiliation of GTMO prisoners, often carried out by female military personnel. A New York Times op-ed titled The Women of GTMO described exploitation and debasement of women in the military, noting that contained page after page of appalling descriptions of the use of women soldiers as sexual foils in interrogations. One such example was outlined at the beginning of the book. Muhammadu recalls in the beginning of the book that one of the examples was a female surgeon assaulting him and telling him, and I quote, having sex with someone is not considered a torture, and proceeded to touch him in the appropriate places. Later in the book, Slahi remembers that there was another incident of a female surgeon being brought in to sexually assault him and harass as a part of the torture. In one of the instances, when Slahi was harassed, sexually assaulted during an interrogation, the core interrogator, a male SFC, Sally, as he's referred in the book, says to Slahi, stop the fuck praying. You're having sex with American and you're praying, what a hypocrite you are. There were times when he was forced to remove his clothes and be bare naked. The next part is my personal observation about this particular observation, and Slahi doesn't say that in the book. Women who work in the US military have very unhealthy sex lives. They have a large number of partners. They rarely stay faithful to their husbands or partners. This category of military personnel, specifically females, are inclined to use sexual harassment towards the prisoners as a way to impress their male core interrogators. In some cases, that can already be an established sexual relationship between the female interrogator and the male core interrogator, which prompts them to enact their sexual desires as a way of torturing the prisoner. This behavior is likely to be a rare occurrence among the guards and the new recruits. It's worth noting that in a civil environment outside of the prison, where there are no real detainees, no real prisoners, no real interrogators, this expression of sexual desire or fantasy will not be considered or deemed as a psychological illness or issue, or even a crime. But when it becomes a crime, when consent is only one-sided, and when you have drastically more power over the person that you were sexually assaulting. Okay, so the next observation is religiously practicing US surgeons and interrogators who actually practice Christianity. They tend to be people with conscience and also tend to have good marriages and good relationships with their wife. And this, in his time in GTMO, Slahi has encountered many different types of Christians. They were Christians that didn't allow detainees to pray. An interrogator who's being referred in the book as Mr. X once took Slahi to an interrogation room that was freezing cold, full of pictures showing US glories, weaponry, arsenal, even a picture of George Bush. In that room, when he heard Slahi pray, he said, and I quote, "Don't pray. You will insult my country if you pray during my national anthem." But there were also other Christians that stood out in the most profound way. One of them was Lieutenant Colonel Couch. Stuart Couch received Ramzi bin al-Shib's intelligence report when he was assigned to the case of Muhammadu in 2003. Ramzi was a target of an intentional manhunt since 9/11, allegedly accused of coordinating Hamburg cell of hijackers. Because Ramzi has briefly met Slahi and stayed at his place one time, it was alleged that Slahi was the one who recruited Ramzi. For Stuart Couch, this case was really personal. His close friend, Michael Hoare, fellow refueling tanker pilot in the Marines, was a co-pilot of the United Airlines flight that the 9/11 hijackers used to take down the World Trade Center's South Tower. I can only imagine the conviction with which Stuart Couch desired to punish Slahi. After all, someone so close to him has died in 9/11. He would do everything in his power to bring down the person who he considered to be guilty, as all of the, if not, as many of the detainees, if not all of the detainees at GTMO were considered guilty until proven innocent. Couch was reviewing a ton of intelligence reports on Slahi, including the military interrogation reports, which included also files of torture. Around this time, he attended a baptism, and there was a phrase that was said to the congregation that day, which is, "We respect the dignity of every human being, and we seek peace and justice on earth." In an interview in 2009, Stuart Couch described the impact of the baptism as well as the interrogation files that he has reviewed. He says, "I just felt this incredible. All right, there it is. You can't come in here on a Sunday as a Christian, subscribe to this belief of dignity of every human being and say, I will seek justice and peace on the earth, and continue to go with the persecutions using that kind of evidence." And at that point, I knew what to do. I had to get off the fence. Stuart Couch withdrew himself from Muhammadu's case, refusing to proceed with any effort to trying to convict him before a military commission. Alright guys, I got 3 more observations. Let's go. Middle Eastern and African countries tend to treat US rationale for detaining one man over the other dismissively, yet they submit to their commands out of fear and internal corruption. When Muhammadu was about to be transferred to Jordan from Mauritania, the local authorities openly told him, and I quote, "The Senegalese, the Canadians, the Germans, and I myself believe that you're innocent. And I don't know how many witnesses the Americans need to acquit you." Despite being right about Slahi and admitting that an injustice is taking place, DSE, Director of the State Security, he refused to protect Muhammadu. When Slahi asked him, and I quote, "So why don't you protect me from this injustice as a Mauritanian citizen?" The response was, and I quote, "America is a country that is based on and living with injustice, and that this decision was irreversibly decided." What I also found odd was the disincorporation between military personnel from Mauritania and military personnel from the US, you can clearly see who has the upper hand, despite them being supposedly equal partners cooperating on this important task. While DSE was compliant with the requests from the US to transport him, Mohamedou, from Mauritania to Jordan, US didn't provide any accurate details on what's gonna happen next. DSE was under a false impression that Mohamedou is gonna only spend 3 days in prison. This disbalance in supposedly joint venture is a clear sign of a larger strategy being carried out by the leaders of the military-industrial complex. I personally know very little about NATO and will spend considerable amount of time in the future learning about it very soon, but I have a suspicion that the NATO allies have the amount of power or political sway within the NATO itself that is proportional to the amount of contributions that they've made to NATO. Also, side note, after working in corporate America for almost 8 years, I am painfully aware of how corporate structure impacts nearly every aspect of day-to-day of Americans. And I'm starting to agree more and more with Jink on his position on how corporate money is impacting the power and how we in America are run by corporations. That said, I am not anywhere near being progressive because some of the values do not align with my conservative Muslim values. Another observation, you ready for that? That's a bit painful though. Jordan is US's hatchet man. It outsources interrogations that US doesn't want to be implicated in. In his book, Slahi says, and I quote, "It's amazing how the FBI trusts the Jordanians more than the other American intelligence agencies." I was really negatively surprised about this and wanted to learn more about it. And so as I learned more, as I continued reading the book, I became less and less surprised, I guess, of the level of cruelty that was applied by Muslim officers, interrogators, towards fellow Muslims. Back in Russia, where I grew up, placing the Muslim executioners as head of the states, head of the republics, head of the military personnel is a common practice. What surprised me the most wasn't just that Muslims in Jordan were carrying out interrogations and investigations that US itself didn't want to be implicated in. What surprised me was, how is it that an Arab, a Muslim country, has built so much trust with the US that US is entrusting it with arguably really difficult jobs, a trust that historically has no preposition to exist. I'm fully aware of political interests and that there aren't that many morals when it comes to common political grounds. But I was genuinely surprised that American Christians trust Arab Muslims to gather and safeguard supposed top secret intel. But Slahi answered my question in the book, and I quote, "You buy the best product for the best price, regardless of the country of origin." He continues, "Do the Jordanians offer the best product in this case? I'm not sure, but they understand the recipe of terrorism more than Americans. Reportedly, without the Jordanians in the field, the Americans would never have achieved what they have." Also, I can't help but think one of the points he brought up in the book was that over 50% of Jordanians are of Palestinian descent. I also wanted to read you a quote from the book, where Slahi says, "It didn't make sense that Palestinians would work for America to defeat the people who are supposedly helping them." He goes on to say, "The historical enemies were allied to roast me. It was really absurd and funny at the same time." So Americans and subsequently Israelis can trust Palestinians, and they do appreciate their violence, just not in Gaza or West Bank. Got it. Make that make sense. Another interesting part about the Jordanian prisons was that most people in Jordan were not, according to Uslahi in the comments in the book, they were not detained because of crime they committed. They were detained because they knew something. One day, Mohamedou overheard something that sounded like training noise, and he was curious about where is that noise coming from? What are they training for? A person in the book that he refers to as Ninja said, and I quote, "Yes, do you want to train with us? We have many detainees enjoying PT." These were sounds of torture. Ninja had his face covered, and one of the guards shared the reason for that. He said, and I quote, "They want to protect their identities. In Jordan, you can get killed for doing such things," referring to what they were doing to people, because like I mentioned, they were detaining a lot of people for what they knew, but not for what they committed. And so when they were interrogating and torturing those people, regular Jordanians knew that that was a crime. And so they were covering their faces and protecting their identities so people didn't know who they were. Side note, Jordan, it wasn't the only country complicit with US crimes. In an interrogation that Slahi underwent, one of the surgeons said to him, and I quote, "The good thing, we don't have to dirty our hands with you. We have Israelis and Egyptians doing the job for us." You know, this really got me thinking, allegedly, what kind of crimes US has committed that Israel knows about and holding over US's head? Am I crazy for thinking that? Or are you also thinking that? Let me read again what this female surgeon said. "The good thing, we don't have to dirty our hands with you. We have Israelis and Egyptians doing the job for us." And then with Egypt, knowing the power imbalance, I also want to ask a similar question. What kind of crimes did Egypt commit that the US is holding over its head? In my opinion, these are really valid questions in the context of Gaza. My final observation. Muslim guards and Muslim interrogators can pray with the Muslim detainees and beat the crap out of them in the same breath. I think this is a very, very little known fact among the Muslim population. I know it took me by surprise. The man Muhammadu refers to in the book as Haji was a man who was a Jordanian man who was tasked with transporting Slahi from Ania to Jordan. The event took place during Ramadan, and this guy, Haji, was fasting just like Slahi, and even promised to pray when they reached the destination upon Slahi's request to pray. He never upheld his promise about praying. Yet, in the same breath, when he had a conversation with him, Slahi has asked him, "So how do you know if detainees are terrorists? He might be innocent." He replied, and I quote, "I don't care. If my boss said he's a terrorist, he is. I'm not allowed to follow my personal judgment." He went on to even brag, and I quote, "They want us to have no mercy with terrorists. I can kill a terrorist who is running away without wasting more than one bullet." Madu also recalled in his book moments of violence towards him by the Muslim military personnel in Jordan. But again, this double standard is not only in Jordan. Muhammadu recalls a conversation that he had with an Algerian soldier who was seeking asylum in Germany. He told Slahi, and I quote, "During an ambush, we captured a 16-year-old teenager, and on the way to jail, our boss stopped, took him off the truck, and shot him dead. He didn't want him in jail. He wanted revenge." Alright guys, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this little book review. I highly encourage you to get the book. I mean, the actual book is much better than my review. There's a lot of details there that I have missed that I highly recommend that you read yourself. Get a feel of the book. It took so much work, guys, for this book to be in front of you, so show it some love. Alright, I'll see you in the next one.